They want us to graph this function f of x and also its inverse and find the domain and range of all of them. So let's first just find f inverse. To find f inverse, I'm going to switch x and y. So there's x and y switch, and now I'm going to solve for y. So to solve for y, I first isolate the exponential. So I add 2 to both sides. Now I convert this into a logarithmic equation. And to do that, I take the log of both sides. So remember the equivalent says the log base 4 of x plus 2 equals y plus 1. And now, therefore, I'm going to write the y in front. Y equals the log base 4 of x plus 2 minus 1. And of course, that new y is really my f inverse. So I'll relabel that as f inverse of x. Okay, now let's graph each one of these and find any asymptotes, etc. So this graph we'll do in brown. Notice that graph, let's label a few things. First of all, notice that it is shifted. Your base graph is 4 to the x, which is going to look just like this, going through 0, 1, like every exponential graph does, as long as the base is bigger than 1. Yeah. But it's going to be shifted left 1 and down 2. So it'll be left 1 and down 2. So that point will become -1, -1. Let's test it to make sure that's right. -1, 4 to the 0 is 1, 1 minus 2 is -1, so that is my point. -1, -1, and my asymptote also shifted down 2 because that was a horizontal asymptote. So let's do that on the graph. So here's your horizontal asymptote shifted down 2. To make it an asymptote, let's make it a dotted line. And then that point was 1, 1. I call that my handle. There's my handle, and I know it's going to approach, and it's going to go. Well, let's find the y-intercept because it's always good to find the y-intercept. The y-intercept is where x equals 0. So f of 0 equals 4 to the 0 plus 1 minus 2, which is just 4 minus 2, which is 2. So that point is there. That way, I'm drawing it through. I'm not going to worry so much about my x-intercepts. They didn't ask for them. Those are a little bit harder to find. There's your graph. Pretty accurately drawn, too. Okay. Now let's do in red, let's do the graph of the inverse. Well, first of all, I know what the graph of the inverse is going to be. It's really just going to be this. If I draw in the line y equals x, so there's the line y equals x. If I draw that line in, again, I'll make it a dotted line. That line, y equals x, is going to be the line about which, if I reflect it, I can reflect that graph over that line, and it's going to give me the graph of the inverse. So it better look like this. I'm going to graph it first and then check it. That point's still going to be there because it's -1, -1. This point, which was on the brown graph, the point was 0, 2. On the red graph, what's the point going to be? 2, 0. It's going to be 2, 0. My asymptote is going to be my vertical. Now instead of a horizontal asymptote, I'm going to have a vertical asymptote, and the vertical asymptote will be
2, 0.
It'll be at 2. The vertical asymptote will be here. And now my graph is going to look like this. It's going to notice it's going to be reflected over that line. So it's going to be doing that. And let's check to make sure that's right. This was a shift of your base graph, your base log graph looks like this. That's your base log graph approaching the asymptote of the y-axis, and I'm shifting it left 2 and down 1.
Yeah.
So this graph, this turns into the asymptote, shifts over to -2, and this point shifts down 1. Sure enough, that's exactly what I have there. So there's your graph, there's your answer.
All right, cool.
So now let's find the domain and range of this. So the domain of the, let's do the exponential graph first, the brown one. The brown one, if you notice, the domain is everything, everywhere where there's an x value. So I do a vertical line scan, and you'll notice that I'm always going to touch that point. I'm always going to touch the x-axis. I'm sorry, the graph when I do a scan. So the domain is all real numbers. The domain of f is from -infinity to +infinity.
Okay.
The range is restricted because
You can only go past. You can't go past this.
that's right. If I scan it horizontally, I notice I only start hitting it once I get past -2. So it's from -2, not including it, to +infinity. All right. The domain of the red one is going to be, remember the x's and y's are changed.
Yeah.
So the domain of the red graph is going to be from -2 to infinity, and the range is going to be from -infinity to infinity.